The day I told my mother-in-law I was keeping the baby, she smiled at me from across her kitchen island and said, "That's wonderful news, sweetheart." 3 weeks later, she reported me to Child Protective Services and told them I had a drug problem. I want to tell you something I have never said out loud before. I used to think that the worst thing a person could do to you was lie to your face. I was wrong. The worst thing a person can do is lie to everyone around you while smiling at your face, so that when you finally scream the truth, you are the one who looks unhinged. My name is not important. What is important is that I was 29 years old, 7 weeks pregnant, working as a forensic paralegal at a mid-sized litigation firm in Columbus, Ohio, and I had just made the single best decision of my life. I had also, without knowing it, just started a war. My husband, I'll call him by what he was to me then, which was everything, had been with me for 4 years. We met at a mutual friend's birthday in Clintonville, argued about whether Skyline chili counted as real chili, and never really stopped talking after that. He was smart and funny, and he had this way of tilting his head when he was genuinely listening to you that made you feel like the most important person in the room. I loved him completely. I trusted him the way you trust the ground under your feet, without thinking about it because it has never moved. His mother was a different story from the beginning. She lived 40 minutes north of us in a house she had not paid for herself. My husband's grandfather had left a substantial trust when he died, somewhere in the range of $2 million, split between my husband and his younger sister. The trust had a distribution clause tied to age and, notably, to family continuity, language his grandfather's estate attorney had included to ensure the money stayed within bloodlines. My husband would receive his full distribution at 35. He was 32 when I got pregnant. His mother had been managing the trust's family correspondence since my husband's father passed. She wasn't the trustee, that was a bank, but she had made herself the emotional gatekeeper of everything surrounding it. Every birthday, every holiday, every family decision somehow looped back to her in what she thought was best for the trust, for the family name, for her son's future. I had never fit neatly into that picture. I was not from their social circle. I did not have family money. I worked with my hands and my brain, and I had student loans, and apparently that made me a liability in her eyes long before I ever became a threat. When we sat across from her at dinner to share the pregnancy news, I watched her face very carefully. I had learned to do that. There was a half second less than that, really, where something cold moved behind her eyes before the warmth flooded in. I almost missed it. I filed it away and said nothing, because at that point I was still trying to believe I was wrong about her. I was not wrong about her. The CPS report came 6 weeks later. A caseworker named someone I had never met knocked on our apartment door on a Tuesday morning while I was getting ready for work. She was professional and kind and clearly uncomfortable. She told me there had been an anonymous tip alleging that I had a history of substance use and that I was currently using during the pregnancy. She needed to do a wellness check and ask some questions. I stood in my own doorway in my work blazer with my prenatal vitamins still on the kitchen counter behind me, and I felt something shift permanently inside my chest. I submitted to a voluntary drug screen that same morning. Clean. The caseworker noted in her report that the home was stable, the mother was employed and cooperative, and the allegation appeared to be unfounded. She closed the case within 2 weeks. I never told my husband who I thought made that call. Not then, I needed to be sure. The problem with having a mother-in-law who is intelligent and calculated is that she does not make mistakes you can easily catch. She works in suggestions. She works in questions. She had been planting seeds in my husband's mind for years. Small doubts, gently framed, always wrapped in concern. She never said, "Your wife is lying." She said things like, "I just want to make sure you two are on the same page," and "I hope she's taking care of herself. You know how stress affects people differently." She was masterful at it. And my husband, who loved his mother and had lost his father and was still in some ways emotionally a son before he was a husband, absorbed it all like soil absorbs rain. Without noticing, I want to be honest about what those months felt like, because I think sometimes people tell these stories and skip over the part where they almost broke. I almost broke. I was exhausted in the way that only first trimester pregnancy on top of chronic stress can make you. I was going to work and doing my job and smiling and functioning, and then I was coming home and lying in bed staring at the ceiling, wondering if I was being paranoid, wondering if his mother was actually just a concerned woman and I was the problem. That is what gaslighting does when it is slow and sustained. It does not make you doubt the other person, it makes you doubt yourself. And I was so tired and so pregnant and so desperate for peace that doubting myself felt easier than the alternative. The alternative was understanding that the woman my husband had been raised to trust was actively trying to dismantle my life. I started keeping records in April. A simple notes app on my phone. Nothing sophisticated. Every incident, time-stamped. The CPS report, a conversation at Easter where she mentioned to my sister-in-law, loud enough for me to hear, that some women use pregnancy to trap a man with money. A voicemail she left my husband asking him if he had looked into the paternity question, which she framed as something she had read about in a magazine, something women in my position sometimes did. I wrote it all down. Date, time, what was said, who was present. I also called an attorney, not a divorce attorney, a civil litigation attorney. I worked in law, I knew what documentation was worth, and I knew that what she was doing had a name and potentially had consequences. My attorney told me to keep collecting. She told me to be patient. She told me that the moment his mother made a move that crossed a legal line, we would be ready. That moment came in June. My husband received a letter from the bank that managed the trust. It was a formal inquiry, triggered, the letter explained, by a request from a concerned family member, questioning whether my husband's marriage met the terms of the trust's family continuity clause. The letter was careful and bureaucratic, but what it was asking, in the language of estate law, was whether I was a legitimate partner or financial opportunist, and whether the pregnancy had been disclosed honestly. I sat at the kitchen table and read that letter 3 times. Then I went to our bedroom, and I sat on the edge of the bed and I thought about the woman I had been 4 years ago before I met my husband. The woman who had worked nights to finish her paralegal certification, who had driven a car with a broken heater through 2 Ohio winters because she could not afford to fix it, who had never once in her life asked anyone for money or used anyone or positioned herself as anything other than exactly what she was. And I thought about my daughter. I already knew it was a girl, and I thought about what world I was going to build for her, and whether I was going to let anyone at all, make her feel like her existence was a legal question to be investigated. I called my attorney from the bedroom while my husband was in the kitchen making dinner. I kept my voice very even. I want to be clear about what I did next, because I have had people ask me if I feel guilty, and the honest answer is no, not even a little. I had spent months documenting. I had the time-stamped notes. I had saved the voicemail. I had screenshots of text messages his mother had sent my husband. Messages he had shown me himself, not knowing what I was going to do with them, in which she had on 3 separate occasions referenced my background and my motivations in ways that were defamatory and demonstrably false. I had the CPS report, which named an anonymous complainant and which my attorney had already begun the process of subpoenaing the source records for. And I had one more thing, something she did not know about. 3 months earlier, when I had begun to truly understand what was happening, I had installed a small home security camera on our front porch. It was completely legal in the state of Ohio. It recorded audio and video. 2 weeks before the trust letter arrived, that camera had recorded a 40-minute conversation between my mother-in-law and my sister-in-law on our porch while I was inside, and my husband was at the hardware store. They did not know I was home. They did not know about the camera. They spoke freely. I will not quote the whole conversation. What matters is that in that recording, my mother-in-law explicitly stated that she had made the CPS call. She used the word anonymous and laughed about it. She described her plan to challenge the trust distribution by raising questions about the pregnancy's legitimacy. She talked about a contact she had at a local family law firm who had advised her on the language to use in the letter to the bank. She said, and I remember this exactly because I have listened to it more times than I can count, if she can't handle the pressure, she'll leave on her own. And if she doesn't leave, we give her enough reasons to look unstable. That was the moment I stopped almost breaking and started building. My attorney filed a civil complaint for defamation, intentional infliction of emotional distress, and tortious interference with a contractual relationship, specifically the trust distribution my husband was legally entitled to receive. We attached the audio recording, the subpoenaed CPS source records confirming her as the complainant, the voicemails, the text message screenshots, and my 4 months of timestamped documentation. The bank received a copy of the complaint and a letter from my attorney explaining that the trust inquiry had been initiated through fraudulent misrepresentation by a non-authorized party with a personal financial motive. The bank's legal team responded within 10 days. The inquiry was closed. I told my husband everything on a Sunday morning in July. I sat him down at the kitchen table, the same table where I had read that trust letter, and I laid out every document in the order it had happened. I did not editorialize, I did not cry. I just showed him the evidence piece by piece, the way I had learned to do in 4 years of litigation support, and I let the record speak. I want to tell you that he believed me immediately, that he stood up and held me and told me he was sorry for not seeing it sooner, and that everything was simple after that. But this is a true story, and true stories do not work that way. He sat with it for a long time, he asked questions, he listened to the recording, he went very quiet in the way that men go quiet when they are restructuring something fundamental inside themselves. He asked me why I had not told him sooner, and I told him the truth, which was that I had needed to be sure, and that I had also needed to know whether, when the moment came, he would choose me. There was a long silence. Then he said, "I'm sorry it took this long for you to have to prove it." That was enough. Not everything, but enough to start. His mother hired a defense attorney. The civil case moved slowly, the way civil cases do, but it moved. The defamation claim was the strongest. Ohio has clear precedent on false statements made to government agencies, and the audio recording made the intentional infliction claim almost airtight. Her attorney approached us about a settlement in October. My attorney and I discussed it. We countered. 3 weeks before the case was set for mediation, she settled. The terms are confidential, so I will not state the amount. What I will tell you is that it covered my daughter's college fund, a significant portion of our mortgage down payment on the house we bought in Bexley the following spring, and my attorney's fees with enough left over that I did not have to think about money for a long time. My mother-in-law also signed an agreement that included a no-contact provision and an admission of civil liability. She will never be in a courtroom telling a judge she did nothing wrong because her signature on that document says otherwise. My sister-in-law sent me an email 6 months after the settlement. It was 2 sentences. It said she was sorry and that she had not understood what her mother was capable of. I read it once and I did not respond. I am not interested in managing other people's guilt. My daughter was born in November, 7 pounds 4 ounces, with her father's ears and my stubbornness. She came out screaming and she has not really stopped since, in the best possible way. She's the loudest, most opinionated, most completely herself person I have ever met, and she is 2 years old and she already knows what she wants and she says so without apology. I am taking notes. My husband and I rebuilt slowly. It took longer than I wanted and required more honesty than was comfortable, on both sides. We went to therapy individually and together. He had to untangle years of his mother's framing of who I was and who he was supposed to be, and that is not work that happens quickly or neatly. But he did the work. That matters. Not all men would, and I knew that, and it factored into what I chose to keep. I went back to the litigation firm after my maternity leave, and within 8 months I had been promoted into a senior research role that I had been quietly working toward for 2 years. I am not a CEO. I am not running a company. I am a woman who is very good at her job, who has a daughter who will grow up knowing that her mother did not fold when someone tried to make her disappear, and that feels like more than enough. I think about what I would say to the version of myself who stood in her doorway in a work blazer on a Tuesday morning, staring at a CPS caseworker, feeling the ground tilt beneath her. I would say, start writing things down today. Not because you will need it, though you might, but because the act of documentation is the act of refusing to let someone else control the narrative of your own life. Every time-stamped note is a small declaration that what happened to you was real and that you were there and you remember. I would also say the people who try to make you look unstable are counting on you to act unstable. The most devastating thing you can do to someone who has planned your unraveling is to remain, calmly and thoroughly, the most credible person in the room. I know there are women listening to this right now who are in the middle of it, who are exhausted in second-guessing themselves and wondering if they are the problem. I want to say this clearly: document everything, trust your instincts, and find an attorney before you think you need one. You are not paranoid, you are paying attention. My daughter is asleep in the next room. My husband is downstairs. The house is quiet in the particular way that houses with small children are quiet, which is to say it feels borrowed, temporary, precious. I am sitting at the desk in the room we turned into a home office, and I am looking at a framed photo on the shelf. It is the three of us at the hospital the day she was born. My husband looks terrified and overwhelmed. My daughter looks furious at having been removed from wherever she was. I look like someone who has been through something enormous and has come out the other side not unscathed, but intact. That word means a lot to me, intact. They did not break me. They tried methodically and deliberately, and they failed, and I have the documents to prove it. I am still here. I am still exactly who I was before any of this happened, except that now I know precisely what I am capable of, and that knowledge belongs to me in a way that no trust fund, no family name, and no settlement agreement ever could. Keep your records. Trust the ground you built yourself. No one can take from you what you had the clarity to document and the courage to defend. There is a photo on my shelf of the three of us at the hospital the day my daughter was born. I look at it sometimes when the house is quiet and she is finally asleep, and I try to remember the woman I was the morning that CPS caseworker knocked on my door. I was standing in my own home in my work blazer, prenatal vitamins on the counter behind me, being asked to prove I was not a danger to a child who had not yet been born. That memory used to make me sick. Now it just reminds me of something I had to learn the hard way, that how you respond to the worst moment is the thing that determines everything that comes after it. I did not respond with rage. I responded with a notes app and a timeline and 4 months of quiet, careful documentation. I know that does not sound dramatic. It is not the kind of thing that makes a satisfying story in the moment. But I work in litigation. I have spent years watching people lose cases they should have won because they reacted emotionally when they needed to think clearly. I knew what a record was worth. I knew that the truth on its own is not always enough. You have to be able to prove it, and proving it requires patience and precision and the willingness to hold yourself together long past the point where falling apart would have felt justified. That is what I think about when people ask me how I got through it. Not strength in some vague, inspirational sense. Specific, practical intelligence applied to an unbearable situation. My mother-in-law was counting on me to look unstable. She had designed a pressure campaign with that exact outcome in mind. The most devastating thing I could do was refuse to perform the breakdown she had scripted for me. So I did not. I took notes. I called an attorney. I kept going to work. I let the record build. What she did was wrong in a way that went beyond strategy or family drama. She filed a false report to a government agency about a pregnant woman she wanted to disappear. She tampered with a legal trust through fraudulent misrepresentation. She looked her son in the face for months and let him believe things about his wife that she knew were not true. That kind of deliberate cruelty does not require karma or cosmic justice to eventually cost something. It requires documentation, civil procedure, and a bank's legal team reading a very clear letter from a very prepared attorney. The consequences were not supernatural, they were logical. What she set in motion, the evidence I gathered, simply redirected back toward her. My daughter does not know any of this yet. She is 2, and her primary concerns are snacks and whether the dog will sit still long enough to be hugged. But I think about the person she is going to become, and I think about what I want her to understand about being a woman in a world that will sometimes try very hard to make her feel small or fraudulent or unstable. I want her to understand that her integrity, the gap between who she actually is and what people are willing to say about her, is something she can protect, not by being perfect, but by being honest and by keeping receipts. I want her to know that intelligence without conscience is just manipulation, and that conscience without the courage to act on it is just good intentions that never did anyone any good. The combination of all three, knowing what is right, thinking clearly about how to defend it, and refusing to quit before the record is complete, that is what actually moves a life forward. I learned that in the most painful classroom imaginable, but I learned it. The house is quiet. My daughter is asleep. The photo is on the shelf. I am intact.